There are several reasons why people and nations go to war.
For God is one of them.
Sic semper tyrannis, thus always to tyrants. These famous words, promising death to unjust rulers and dictators alike, are commonly attributed to Brutus as he fatally stabbed Julius Caesar. That assassination is one of the earliest recorded acts of terrorism. The ancient world had its fair amount of tyrannicide and political backstabbing, though, the kind with actual knives. Violent gangs and hired killers roamed the streets of Rome and Athens, intimidating or outright murdering those who would cross the wrong people. The Middle Ages saw terror used as a weapon in warfare. Armed bands raided villages, attacking seemingly random people and robbing them of their valuables. But terrorism, as we know it, began in the pre-modern age of enlightenment. The philosophers of the 18th century began to fundamentally change the understanding people had about power and the natural order of societies. The general public began to grasp that sovereignty of the state did not have to reside in single figures like kings or emperors, but could in the nation as a whole. The common people consequently felt that they were subjects of a deeply unfair system, which ruled through the oppression of the masses. As the people revolted, the ideas of tyrannicide re-emerged. It would be the French Revolution that really began changing things. After the violent deposition and later murder of Louis XVI, it was expected that his socio-political system of oppression by the privileged few would vanish as well. But even as the old order fell apart in the chaos of the revolution, the violence did not stop. On the contrary, the National Convention of the Revolutionary Jacobins proudly proclaimed that terror is the order of the day. Anyone affiliated with the old regime, or even slightly suspicious of standing in the way of progress, was suddenly fair game for popular violence. Having a different opinion or doubts about the course of the revolution became synonymous with treason. Everyone could be a counter-revolutionary, as the specifications were held deliberately vague. Violence against enemies was in fact encouraged. The political assassin who killed one to save 1,000 became the central romantic figure of the time. In its zealotry for change, the French Revolution set the language and purpose of modern terrorism. Robespierre saw terror as prompt, severe, inflexible justice, a virtue that enforced social progress and cultural change. The rule was given over to a régime de terreur, and its members proudly called themselves les terroristes. Terror also consequently destroyed any chance of political dialogue. The traditional barriers of humanity broke down as terror simply bred more terror. Blood ran in the streets as hundreds of thousands were killed by guillotine, firing squad, and lynch mob until the revolution eventually turned in on itself. Now, the Russian Empire was still, by the end of the 19th century, easily the most backward nation in Europe. Over 85% of its people were illiterate peasants, living in poverty and shackled to serfdom. There were no elections, no political parties or trade unions to ensure their civil rights. Instead, they were ruled by the absolute power of the Tsar, and he used the police and the army to keep it that way. But new opposition began to appear. Marxists, liberalists, anarchists, they all stood in opposition to the exploitation of the agrarian people, and were often led and supported by groups of young students who dreamed of bettering the Russian society. Conspiratorial activity had an intriguing, mystical flair to it, and many would-be assassins stylized themselves as fanatic nihilists who lived only for the cause, and the cause was the destruction of state authority. Many praised banditry as the most noble and pure form of the revolutionary. Each assault against the state, each knifed politician, each policeman gunned down was a step forward. The perfect terrorist freed himself of all ethical concern, since the concepts of morality and legality were already perverted by the oppression of the state. He would have no emotional attachments save to the cause and never compromise his goals, for the revolution would be total or it would not be at all. The goal of terrorism was to demonstrate the weakness of the governing elite and to provoke popular rebellion against them. Another game changer was the invention of high explosives. In the past, gunpowder plots had been crude and prone to failure, but Alfred Nobel's invention of dynamite soon found its way into the hands of terrorists. Unlike knives and revolvers, using dynamite would not be mistaken for an ordinary murder. However, when Tsar Alexander II was killed this way in 1881, so were a lot of innocent bystanders as well. Russian newspapers began flooding the market, each trying to sell themselves by printing in big bright letters about new assassinations and new terrorist attacks. The media played its part in spreading the propaganda of the deed, attracting people, bitter, alienated by society, and thirsty for revenge, to a cause that was promised to be popular, historical, and grandiose. Over the following decades, modern terrorism took on many forms. Socialist violence surged in Europe and the US after World War I. Russia fell to the Bolsheviks and saw the terror of the Russian Civil War. And a series of political murders destabilized interwar Europe. Japan underwent a whole era of government by assassination, and the Ku Klux Klan reemerged as a big threat in the US. In the 1930s and 40s, state terror from fascist, National Socialist, and Stalinist governments was turned against its own people from the top down. After 1945, the world saw anti-colonial terror, violent ethno-nationalism, or radical separatist movements, white supremacist terror, radical left-wing bombings, lone wolf killing sprees. The tools of terror could be used by any group and for any cause. Still, what many of us nowadays associate with modern terrorism was shaped by the events of September 11, 2001, when a group of Arab jihadists hijacked 4 airliners and crashed them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Seemingly overnight, the Western world focused on the existence of international Islamist terrorism. It was, of course, way older than that. Jihad, that is, to struggle and strive on the path of God, can be interpreted as a defensive war in the name of Islam. Jihadis believe in Tawhid, that the only authority comes from Allah, and every Muslim should be solely guided by His will and the words and actions of the Prophet. No other worldly authority, no laws of states or secular societies could stand above them. With the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the Muslim world lost its acting unified authority, the Caliph. Most Muslim countries came under Western economic dependence and political influence. Consequently, a small westernized elite emerged that ruled the Arab nations through secular and industrial means. The first major resistance against such modernized societies was the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Their motto embodied jihad. God is our objective, the Quran is our constitution, the Prophet is our leader, struggle is our way, and death for the sake of God is the highest of our aspirations. Their aim was to push the European imperialists out of the Muslim world and retract their secularist influence. Disgust and hatred for Western materialism, open sexuality, and the culture of the American way grew. For the devout jihadists, obedience to Allah meant not just rejecting these values, but open revolt against them. The popularity of jihadist teaching surged as the westernized leaders failed to secure economic stability and instead resorted to autocratic oppression. Young men, disillusioned and lost, were vulnerable for radical interpretations of the Quran. The Palestinian cause, the Iranian Revolution, or the fight of the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, they all radicalized a new generation to violence. The belief that the deeds of a small vanguard could free the Muslim world from Western shackles unleashed a new era of international terrorism. It was now a tool to humiliate the West and cripple their societies with fear and outrage. Martyrdom, especially the destruction of the target by the death of the assassin himself, became an ideal in the eyes of the most radical. The suicide bomber, motivated by the promises of the afterlife, was especially effective in horrifying the Western world. And each terrorist act produce the desired echo, both of repulsion and admiration. Historians are debating if this recent era of jihadi terror was fundamentally a new thing or a similar phenomenon to the terror of the past. Each religion has its fair share of radicals and fundamentalists who would not refrain from violence against non-believers. But the idiosyncratic use of Islamic teachings, the prospect of apocalyptic struggle and beneficial martyrdom is rather new. Still, beyond the religious rhetoric, the leaders of Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and ISIS all have very secular motives for their use of terror. All seek to hurt and provoke their enemies and to recruit more followers through an escalating circle of violence. But the end is to be the acquisition of power, territory, and influence among their people. What has also changed is the use of the media. Terrorists know full well that every attack will be at the center of media attention for weeks. They themselves will use the internet and social media to connect with sympathizers all over the world and display their horrific acts of violence to entice others to follow. It would be foolhardy to assume that terrorism will be simply eradicated one day. Instead, it will continue to evolve to be part of radical causes and beliefs. Terrorists, no matter their religion, ethnicity, or political conviction, will always try to hurt their tyrants through acts of fear and violence. Hoping to change an oppressive system, they will continue to kill and hurt innocents. We can try to understand their cause, try to understand the history of terrorism itself, but we can never, ever really justify it.
Stand up and show me your face. Suicidal in a trance, a religious army. Fight without a uniform and hide in the crowd. Call it holy, call it just, authorized by heaven. Leave you wounded as they die and call it God's will.
You have songs like, for example, The Final Solution, which is about people and committing horrible atrocities in the name of a political or ideological thing, right? But there are also, for example, suicide bombers, people that commit horrible atrocities in the name of religion, whatever their religion happens to be.
Yeah, that's true. And the song In the Name of God takes up exactly that. It's a bit of a, also controversial topic because there is a certain part that can be connected to rebellion and uprisings in it as well. But this song refers mainly to the people who by religious minds, commit it, not for necessarily to achieve anything else than attacking people who don't think the same way that they do.
And this is not something... Sure, we know it goes back. You can read the Bible and see it going back thousands of years. But even in recent times, there's plenty of this going on. Now, we were talking recently about the Charlie Hebdo attacks and stuff. Now, you have something interesting about that.
Yeah, because that was one of those moments when such an attack came close to us, so to say. The attack on Charlie Hebdo in Paris happened... I think it was 3 days before our concert's gonna happen, just in the same street, just like few hundred meters down the street. So when we arrive at this concert venue on the show day, the whole place is basically barricaded and locked down and all these police barricades everywhere. And we were super worried what's gonna happen, but fans encourage us, do not cancel in this, because that would be to like kind of submit to these terror. Things. So do not cancel, please play the show. So it was a weird feeling because there was no cheering, no partying. All the fans who arrived at the scene, they saw all these police lockdown things. And as they were letting people inside, we realized also that this is a show. Normally, we do not really, so to say, we play like Sabaton. We're always doing what we do, no matter the circumstances. and we perform our songs in the best way we can. In this case, we actually felt for the first time, I think, that we needed to adjust to the mood of this. We cannot run out and be all like that, because the fans here, they want us to play, but they want us to also feel with them.
Yeah.
Also, in under our normal gear, we had the Charlie Hebdo shirts, and I think it was a very emotional moment when Joachim opened his vest and he showed that we are also we are wearing this, and we saw it everywhere in the audience.
Okay.
There were a lot of people that night who requested us, "Can you please play in the name of God?"
Okay.
Because this song is about this. And we felt that the song would trigger anger, and it was not really what we wanted to trigger at that moment.
Well, what about like things in the name of God that even directly affect bands, like the shooting, the Eagles of Death Metal shooting, 5 years ago, I guess it was?
Yeah, it's also in our memory, and it connects to us. I mean, we had people who were on site, and it's a very strange event in our career. I'm sitting and editing our live DVD, then I'm getting this message from one guy who is in Paris, and he sends me a message. I am safe. I was at the show. I'm safe, and I'm like, what is going on here? Then we see vague information coming out on Swedish site that there has been happening something in Paris. The whole night unfolds as we are watching, and I'm thinking that this is happening in Bataclan, a place where Sabaton was just before this happened.
Okay.
It was also the same promoter that is involved in doing the Sabaton shows who did this concert. Not closely, but I am aware, and we met some people who didn't make it that night.
Wow.
And people that worked on our show just a few months earlier. And we also later had a tour bus which had bullet holes. And they kept the bullet holes in order to honor that, because it was the bus driver and the bus that was there that night. So, and we used that for riding around in Europe for a while. And again, there was suggestions when this happened. There is some fans, a lot of fans, who say, this is why you wrote the song, in the name of God.
Well, it kind of is, to draw attention to just that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing those stories with us.
That's it for this week.
On Sabaton History. See you next time.
Listen to me, everybody. We love the Sabaton History channel. If you do it, please share it with us. Support it on Patreon, YouTube, and any way you want. Let's do this forever.